はじめまして、民泊とニューヨーク市立大学のフィッシャーです。Okay. Now I'm going to speak in English. Okay. I'm going to give some brief comments, things that struck me about these papers. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit more about phonology. And so one thing is that a lot of research, including my own, suggests that in monomorphemic signs, hand shape is the hardest thing to perceive and the least important. So for example, can we stop that noise outside? No. In some language games, within sign language, one hand will remain constant and comprehension is not really impeded. So, for example, in ASL, where this hand shape is taboo, just for fun, you'll sign everything with that hand shape, and people will understand you because you have a syntactic context. So, a lawyer might say that if hand-shape distinctions are compromised, it doesn't really matter because you can understand things without the changing hand shapes. However, that may be true for monomorphemic signs, but for morphologically complex signs, it's very important, for example, in classifier predicates. Similarly, you might say that palm orientation is less important than location and movement. However, it is crucial for verb agreement, as Professor Ichida pointed out. And just to say that this case leads to a lot of broader questions, so that you don't want to talk just about phonology. As this gentleman said, you could have a case where a signer has aphasia or other brain damage, and they can have difficulties in comprehension and or production, and in not just phonology, but morphology and syntax, and even reading and writing as a result of brain damage. And it's crucial going forward to develop assessment tools that can be used by courts and other and educators and other professionals, so that we can have a more standardized evaluation system. Okay, alternative measures. I think that Professor Hara's point about the distribution of places of articulation is very well taken. And we can look at global intelligibility, and that has been used as a measure of speaking ability in my former place of work, but it needs to be within a syntactic and pragmatic context. And as has been mentioned before, very often family members and teachers will understand what someone outside of the family who is less familiar may have more trouble with. Now, the point about communication ability is very important. I think that it's true that deaf people can go outside of the linguistic system to communicate with people who don't share their language. And it is not part of the linguistic system. However, hearing people can do that too. And if it doesn't count for spoken language, if the ability to communicate outside of a linguistic system doesn't count for spoken language, then it should also not count for sign languages. Okay. And just one thing about the channels of communication of course, deaf-blind people do use tactile systems of communication, though they're derived from signing or finger spelling, and there are even cases of manual speech reading where the deaf-blind person puts their hands like this. All right. Now, with regard to distinctive features, I'm trying to go fast, but not too fast for the interpreters. Some features have been posited for sign languages. For example, whether the fingers are spread or closed, or whether the thumb is opposed or not opposed, and the number of fingers that are extended. And Professor Ichida has discussed some of these. For location, these have been less well researched, but for example, same side versus opposite side of the body would be one kind of location distinctive feature. Within movement, there are so many different kinds of movements, but we can derive them, we can divide them into two broad categories: local movement, where the fingers move or the hand moves without a path movement, and the path movement would be the other kind of movement, and these can be combined, of course. Now, I agree that movement is analogous to vowels in that it is the least impeded of the flow of energy. And it is also true that all signs have to have movement, but local movement may be sufficient. So that's that. Just a few things that I think resulted in misunderstanding. If a feature is not distinctive in a certain context, it is possible that different values of the feature, such as voicing, could alternate freely in that environment. And that does not mean that someone isn't following rules. Okay, it just means that the rules are beside the point. Some hand shapes are more marked, which means that they are less frequent within one language and less frequent across sign languages. And that doesn't necessarily relate to any particular theory. There are also processes of assimilation and also perceptual constraints that can account for changes in hand shapes. Okay. Also, I want to point out, I'm a linguist, so I have to say this. Mandel's concept of selected fingers can account for some of the combinations of hand shapes and locations that are not found in Nihon Shua, and I would suggest people look into that. Now, I'm going to put on a legal hat now a little bit and talk about some parallel cases in the US and elsewhere. So I just want to mention, because it will become relevant later, that there was a pianist named Paul Wittgenstein, whose brother was much more famous than he was as a philosopher, who lost his right hand in World War I and therefore commissioned several piano concerti for the left hand. And the most famous of those was by Ravel. Okay? But not every pianist who loses the ability in a hand has the wherewithal to commission a piano concerto. When I was in high school, my father was a judge, and his main job was to serve as an appellate court for people who had been denied disability benefits by Social Security. He had other things that he ruled on too, but that was one of his main jobs. And there came before him a case where a professional pianist had lost enough use of her hands that she could no longer play the piano professionally. Okay, Social Security denied her request for disability benefits, and they said that there was other work that she could still do. And my father reversed that lower decision, saying that the pianist's inability to follow the profession that she had previously made a living at constituted a disability. Now, it seems to me that the ability to communicate in the language that you grew up with is even more important than practicing a profession. So I believe that this is an important precedent in this case.